Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Just a brief introduction. I'm Katie Wagner, principal at St. Helens High School. So thank you all for joining us tonight. This is an opportunity for us to share with you some of our initial plans and thoughts and considerations about what our exciting fall is going to look like, and to give you all an opportunity to provide us with some feedback, some wonderings, some hopes for the year. So that we can take that back as we continue to refine our plan and come up with a robust plan to make sure that all of your kids are getting the best education as we start into the fall. So just a couple of housekeeping things. My secretary, Rose Hall, is online and she's going to be taking notes. So if you would like, you can ask questions in the chat, in the Zoom group chat if you would prefer. Please know that anything that is typed into group chat, whether it's to everyone or to individual people, is transcripted. So all of that will be included kind of in our notes for us to review as well. So we'll have that. And as I mentioned, if you came in a little bit more recently, I also said that we are going to be recording this and then pushing it out online for the rest of our families who couldn't be in attendance so that we're all on the same page moving forward. Towards the end, I'll ask a couple of questions. If you would like to offer feedback, you're welcome to unmute yourself. And I just ask that as we're giving the presentation, if you are moving in and out, just please make sure that you have your own self muted so that we're not hearing background noise or we're getting feedback in that way. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? I've got a PowerPoint to let you know kind of where we're at this point. But I just want to make sure that we don't have any questions before we get started. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here so you can see our reopening PowerPoint. All right. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see this? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Erica. All right. So this is a community feedback session. This is a very similar template to what is being shared at all of our schools district-wide, because we know how important it is to have a consistent message and an articulated plan. Because we know what plan happens in one school is certainly going to be impacted by what's happening at other schools, particularly for our families that have children in multiple schools. So we want to make sure that we're all talking together, coming up with a cohesive plan, and sharing that message with all of you. So some of this stuff you may have heard before if you've been to another school session. A little bit later in the presentation, we have some St. Helens High School specific information. So I hope that you will get some more details to that. And I do want to remind you all, we're still early in the planning phase. We just had some ODE information sessions just this last week. So they are still pushing this out. So we had our administrators come together Monday and Tuesday to dive into some of these ideas, brainstorm. So these are still early stages, still lots of room to get your input and feedback and continue this refinement. Once we have our reopening plans pull together next week and put in a solid couple of days in there, we will have those plans then again vetted through another parent review committee, again for more feedback, align it with any other refinements or new versions of our guidance to make sure that we have the best plan moving forward. So just a little bit of background. The Oregon Department of Education has coordinated with Oregon Health Authority to create the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance for the 2021 school year that is in accordance with our governor's executive order. So the guidance that we are receiving is coming from ODE, and it's quite an extensive document. It's about 60 pages and a lot of checklists of both required and recommended guidance. And I will show you a little bit of what that looks like. That will continue to be revised. Version 1.0 just came out a week and a half ago, and then just Tuesday, version 1.5.8 was just released. The next release, I believe, is to be released on July 21st. So again, the guidance continues to change as well. So we are looking at what changes may have to be made to make sure we're in accordance with that. This guidance is effective immediately and is remaining in effect through June 30th of 2021, unless it is replaced by updated guidance. This is also specific to schools. So county guidance around reopening is led by the governor, but does not necessarily align with school guidance. So you may see executive orders that come out about the requirement to wear masks in all public spaces. That may be true for businesses or in other indoor public areas. As I'll talk a little bit later, the guidance from ODE and OHA is not requiring students to be wearing masks while they're in those indoor school spaces. But in public, then that's a different situation. So just so you're aware, there's two sets of guidance there. So the most recent executive order around Ready School Safe Learners, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Is that it's the in-person classroom instruction is ordered at public and private schools. However, it is subject to certain restrictions. So in order for us to provide in-person instruction, we have to comply with the guidance described in the executive order. And there are certain things that are non-negotiable required pieces in order for us to offer in-person instruction. And then there's other things that are recommended depending on what the situation of our school is, what our staffing is, what our needs of our families and our students are. The other piece to this is that there must be a written plan, which I'll share with you in just a moment what that looks like. And the written plan is called the operational blueprint. And so this written plan has to describe how we will comply with the guidance as described in the executive order. That will be developed in its entirety. It's already started some work. We'll continue that work next week. As I mentioned, we'll be vetted through parents. We'll then come back to our staff. And again, we're involving staff in all of these conversations as well. And then we have to have it vetted through our public health authority before then we submit our final plan on August 15th, which is our plan for moving forward. All right, so the operational blueprint for school reentry. I know you can't see all of this fine print, but this is kind of here just to give you a visual of the operational plan that we are required to put together in order to offer the in-person instruction. So we start with just kind of the basic information. We identify what the requirements are for different instructional models, which I'll show in just a moment. And then here comes the different protocols. So there's 8 different pieces that we have to address in this operational blueprint. The first is around public health protocols. All of these checklists we have to mark off and explain how we're addressing them. So it continues and it continues and it continues into facilities and school operations, continues into response to outbreak. So we have to have a full, complete plan that is focused predominantly around health and safety of our staff and students first, before we can start talking about equity, instruction, family and community engagement, mental, social, and emotional health, and staffing and personnel. So that is the complete operational blueprint. Again, in order for us to even consider the in-person, we have to have very clear public health protocol assurances, facilities and school operations, and have a clear plan for how we would respond to any presumptive or confirmed cases of COVID-19. So this is a graphic that's included in the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance document that shows the 3 different instructional models that we can choose as our primary mode of instruction. So there's, and they have a little bit difference, just kind of some nuance in the type of blueprint that gets developed. So just for clarification, the on-site, which would be students safely learn in school, all students have access to in-person instruction in accordance with public health requirements. That would predominantly be, you have your safe health protocols completed, you can be physical distancing 35 square feet per student or per person in every space that you are utilizing. The majority of the schools that are taking advantage of the on-site instructional model, and this is just purely on-site, are really our small school districts in rural areas that have not been impacted by COVID-19, and they might have 30 students in the building. So again, they realize we have the facilities to have everyone in person. We have all of the personal protective equipment here ready to go. We can manage all of this. We are good. We have a plan moving forward. As school districts get a little bit larger and more complex, then it becomes a little more difficult to manage the size of the facilities, schedules, transportation, nutrition services. And so I would say the majority of schools and districts across the state are selecting the hybrid instructional model, which is the model that St. Helens is adopting. So students are safely learning both in school and away from school. Part of the rationale of this is that our facilities are limited in that we can only fit as many people in our building as 35 square feet per person. Currently at St. Helens High School, and I think I have a slide on this, we have classrooms based on the size that could fit between 10 and 20 students with that physical distancing guideline. So what that means is that with the staff that we have, we can only safely accommodate half of our students at any given point. So this is part of the reason why we're selecting the hybrid model as well. So student groups have access to in-person instruction using staggered schedules, prioritizing grades, courses, programs. So we're in accordance with public health, and that on-site instruction is supplemented by comprehensive distance learning. So I do want to pause for a moment and just recognize that and appreciate that what we experienced this spring was not comprehensive distance learning. What we experienced this spring was an amazing group of staff members that had to pivot on a dime and figure out an entire new way of providing instruction that was remote instruction without the in-person piece, and using tools that we had readily available to us without much planning or resource management. So that distance learning for all is a very different look and feel compared to the comprehensive distance learning. And ODE has made it very clear as well that the two are not the same. So the comprehensive distance learning model is when students are safely learning away from school, entirely remotely, with very limited exceptions for in-person supports. So the comprehensive distance learning requires a lot of staff training. It requires a very consistent and clear learning management system. One of the pieces of feedback that I received from families and from students is that they were starting to get overwhelmed with communication coming in multiple ways, getting reminders from one teacher, not having connections with another staff member, or not sure how to navigate Google Classroom, or teachers were using it in different ways. So we are looking at a single learning management system that can pull together all of our instruction, similar to an online course, but still have at least 2 days per week of that in-person instruction, so that it is comprehensive both outside of the school building and inside of the school building. So that's where that hybrid piece comes into play. If for whatever reason we have to shift to a full comprehensive distance learning model, if let's say we have an outbreak and the Oregon Health Authority comes in and says, this cohort of students needs to be quarantined for 14 days, or this group we need to adjust this, then we will already have that system in place. So it will be less of a whiplash like it was earlier this spring. So I want to share with you, again, we really value our families' feedback and experiences, and we want to honor that because we know that this impacts everyone in our community. So both the high school and the school district sent out surveys the last week of school and the week after, asking for feedback about how are you feeling about all of this, and what types of models do you feel would be a best fit for your family. So the blended learning piece, where students would attend school on certain days or at certain times, but they would be blended with that online platform until all physical distancing restrictions were removed. There was a not comfortable, a middle column that was not labeled, and then a very comfortable. So it's difficult to tell what that middle group is, whether that's I don't know if I'm comfortable or not, or I'm in the middle of the road, or I just really have no opinion. We're not quite sure exactly where those responses lied. But we recognize that 30% not comfortable with blended learning, 30% very comfortable with blended learning. So 60% are really skewed kind of in either direction. So then we have to look at the other instructional models to see where the feedback lies. So when we're talking about remote learning, which is what that distance learning for all would be, so students are not physically present at school, we would receive all resource and instruction from their teachers through an online platform, overwhelmingly was not comfortable with that format. We also heard about or asked about a full online virtual school option. So once we had the switch to the distance learning for all, suddenly there were a lot of families that were wondering, are there online schools that I can then enroll my child at? Do I have to switch districts? Like, what's going on there? So what this would be our district actually adopts a nationally recognized curriculum that's aligned with Oregon state standards, that is taught by school district teachers that are highly qualified in those areas, to create a new full online school option for students in grades K through 12. So students would be enrolled in a virtual program for the year or until the end of the grading period, but they would be part of that online, kind of an online academy. So we did have several of our families, the majority of our families that responded, were not really comfortable with that. And I think overwhelmingly, everyone wants to come back to school. Teachers, staff, we all want to be back in school. But we do have 140 responses to this that were very comfortable with moving forward with an online school option that was not a blended learning. So we want to respect those options, and it's our plan to offer a virtual online school for next year as an option for those families that cannot engage in a hybrid learning or have a high risk family member, or the student is high risk, and this is another option that we have available for families. So with the blended learning, the hybrid model that we are hoping to, or that we will be adopting, is we wanted to figure out there's a couple different ways that we could create that blend of both in-person and that comprehensive distance learning. So one way is to have students attend on certain days of the week. And that leaned or skewed more towards the very comfortable for the specific days of the week. When we're talking about time, so staggered times, let's say this group of students attend in the morning, this group of students attend in the afternoon, overwhelmingly not as comfortable with that. As a parent myself, that would make me really nervous to know where does my child go when they're not in school for the other half of the day, because I can't leave in the middle of the day to go find them childcare. So how would that work? So I think I'm not surprised that there was more of that skew towards the not comfortable for the timing schedules. The other option is having students attend school every other week. So let's say we have cohort A, so just a half the school A, half the school cohort B. Let's say week 1, all the A students come to school, and then the following week they're at home doing comprehensive distance learning while the B group comes to school. Again, that's challenging because, you know, we would have students that don't see their teachers in person for the entire week. Childcare could also be an issue with this. So again, this one skewed more towards the not comfortable. This is, again, just reminding families we will have the online virtual option as a standalone virtual online school in addition to the blended learning. So for our high school, we sent out a wrap-up survey to get some of this information around how families are feeling moving forward, to get some information, but also to give us an idea of what needs our families have and how our families are holding up with everything that's going on. So one of the questions that we had asked was, as we finish the school year and distance learning, how are you and your family holding up? Just kind of general, and holding up means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but we just wanted to get a general idea of how our families were faring. Roughly 30% had reported fair or good. So, that's a pretty big group of families that may need some extra assistance as we navigate this new normal. So that's something for us to keep in mind as we make decisions, and to be really sensitive to the experiences our families are having. One of the other questions is around access to meals. We offered meals to all students from the ages of 0 to 18. Actually, all children ages 0 to 18, whether they attended school or not. And we had about 20% of our respondents who did pick up free meals during our school closure. So again, providing meal service is going to be an ongoing concern that we have, especially if we have students attending half of the days. We still have to have plans in place to provide them with meals when they're not in the building. So as we develop kind of an A-B schedule, as we have half the students in the building at a time, we would need to coordinate when students would take home additional meals for the days that they would not be present. The other big question that we had is around transportation. I don't know if any of you participated in any of the senior events where we did the drive-through, picking up graduation bags with the social distancing. And I'm sure that most of you have driven through our parking lots or driven up Gable or back behind the school, and traffic can get a little bit crazy, especially in the morning. So we wanted to figure out how are our students planning to get to school, especially because this dynamic has changed level of comfort with the bus or with walking or supervision. And what we found is about 21% were going to be riding the bus, 33% planning to be driven by a parent, and then 32% plan to drive themselves, which means that they would be parking on campus. So if we generalize that, that's 60% of our student body that plan to have vehicles coming to our building and either driving their kids through or dropping them off, or kids parking. And then we also have staff that are driving in and parking at that same time. So we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive traffic management plan, because we want everyone to stay safe, whether people are walking across streets, at the crosswalks, not clogging up thoroughfares. So this is really good information for us to have, so that we can make mornings and afternoons as smooth as possible, especially with the buses coming through as well. One other piece of information that is not widely shared, but our McKinney-Vento program is a federal program that supports homeless youth. And so we had 55 students last year at the school who were identified as McKinney-Vento homeless youth, which means that they receive additional supports for clothing, for food, for mental health, access for looking for housing, additional supports in that way. And out of those 55 students, 34 were unaccompanied minors. So that's 34 students that we work with that do not have any family support. They are high school students that are trying to navigate getting a high school diploma, for the most part on their own, and navigating a system without a whole lot of guidance outside of the supports our school offers. So again, we want to be using that equity lens and make sure that the needs of those students who may not have those advocates are being met as well. So the three primary questions that we were asked as administrators to start brainstorming this work, and then I'll share with you some of the ideas that we came up with, and then we'll ask for some feedback. First is, how are we going to group and cohort students and staff to maintain safety and track potential outbreaks? This is one of the primary pieces of our reopening plan that is required as following our health protocols. The second question, what practices will we put in place to keep students and staff as safe as possible from contracting the virus? While we always want to make sure our students are safe, we also have to consider the safety of our staff. If we have too many staff that get ill, then it's really difficult to run a building. We see that even during a regular year when we have a group of staff members and we end up with a high number of substitutes. It's really difficult to run a building. But every single district across Oregon is going to be short-staffed on substitutes. So the last thing that we want is to put our staff at more risk than they need to be and risk shutting down the school because we don't have the operational capacity. And then the third question is, what will teaching and learning look like for my child, right? We all want to make sure that our kids are getting the best education possible. And so those are our big primary questions. I always like to come back to some guiding principles whenever we are making some larger systemic changes, because when we have ideas that come up, if we are looking at it through a specific lens, then we're better equipped to decide if that's something that we want to move forward and allocate resources to, or is that something that maybe we need to put on the back burner and look into a little bit more, or does that not meet our guiding principles at all and we choose not to move forward with that. First of all, the physical and social emotional health and safety of our school staff and students is our #1 priority. We want everyone to be safe and healthy. If you were here at the beginning of this school year, we started the year with a public health crisis. And so I became really familiar in working with the Oregon Health Authority and our public health in trying to navigate what our response is, who do we need to be contact tracing. Luckily, it turned out to not be a public health issue, but there was a lot of uncertainty during that time. So we need to make sure that we're working as partners so that everyone's health and safety is protected. Second guiding principle is that we recognize that students need to be in class and connected with their teachers as much as possible. I saw that with my own daughter during distance learning. She was very excited to be actually connecting with her teacher in live chats. And so if they are in class and connecting with their teachers, I think everyone is better for it. And I know that our staff really value that as well. We also recognize that students need access to courses and appropriate challenge, interventions, and support that will provide them with quality preparation for whatever post-secondary options are ahead of them. Fourth is that we recognize we cannot eliminate risk. We can't wrap everyone in a bubble and say we're all going to be safe and healthy all the time. It's just not possible. But we do have to do what we can to mitigate risk for the best interest of our entire community. We have, over 1,000 people in our building every single day. And 1,000 people in our community is a really large percentage of people that are coming together. And what we do in our school impacts the entire community. Another piece too, particularly at the secondary and the high school level, is that our systems are incredibly complex and they're also interwoven. So that requires the involvement of multiple stakeholders to provide perspective and feedback. One example is our childcare program at the school. It started as a teen parent program, and over time, it also added the component of our preschool promise, which is a separate funded program. And then it developed into a program of study for early childhood education and dual credit program. And so because all of those pieces are working together, and we have it connected with that's highly dependent upon our high school workers, they actually have additional guidance they are getting from the state under the child care division that is not necessarily the exact same as the guidance that we're getting from ODE for opening schools. So we have to work together to work those, kind of triangulate all that information to make sure that that system can work, because we know that the child care program and childcare in general in Columbia County is going to be hurting for additional spots. So the last thing that we want to do is to be shutting down that program that is a central part of our district. I also know that there are also some other childcare programs in our county that have already shut down or made plans to not reopen in the fall. So that need is definitely going to be there to support those programs. And then finally, we must provide a free and appropriate education to all of our students and to work to develop systems of equity that honors the needs of our historically underserved students and keep those needs at the forefront as we develop these new systems. So I've got these kind of organized into different aspects of running a school. The bus, for those families that are going to be using the bus, There will be some type of a visual or question screening at the entrance of the bus. Physical distancing and isolation protocols would be in place. There's going to be tracking or daily logging so that we are able to do any kind of contact tracing or turn that over to the health authority to do that. We are also working with transportation to determine routes so that families with children in multiple school buildings will have the same schedule. So this may be organizing based on geography. So we're going to look at drawing some lines in different places and saying, okay, this group is going to be cohort A, so you're coming to school on Mondays and Wednesdays. This group is going to be cohort B, you're coming to school Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're trying to finesse that. So that's in process. But the last thing that we want is to just run our normal bus routes all the time and then have kids all jumbled up. We want to be very intentional around that. I mentioned the driving piece, so we have to develop traffic and parking guidelines to make sure that our student, staff, and neighborhood are safe, and that our entrance into our building is efficient as well. So in order to enter the school, one of the requirements is that we have to do some type of a screening and keep a daily check-in log that includes questions. And I don't know if you've walked into any healthcare facility recently, but you come up to this front desk, they ask you questions, they might take your temperature. If you're clear, then you can go about your business. Similar to that, so we're working with our school nurse and with Oregon Health Authority to determine, are we good with just, asking some questions, or do we need to take a temperature? But we want to make sure that we are screening people as they come into the building to ensure the safety of everyone. What that means is that if we have, and I'm just going to use these round numbers, we have a little over 800 students that are enrolled. So I'll just say 800 for sake of ease. So if we have 400 students that are coming into the building each day, that means we have to screen 400 students walking into the building each day. So the easiest way that we can expedite that is to assign students to a building entry point to try to expedite that as quickly and efficiently as possible. I know the last thing that a high schooler wants to do is stand outside in a line 6 feet away from everyone else, just waiting to get into a building, particularly if it's raining outside. So we want to make sure that that moves as quickly as possible. Any entry to the building after that point, they would need to come to the main office and use our normal procedure with the buzzer, and then our secretaries would follow our protocol. We are also planning to install washing stations and hand sanitizer at each entry station and in multiple places around the building. If we have students that want to wash their hands, we don't necessarily have to have them go into the restroom in order to do that, which would then reduce the number of people who could be actually using the restroom. So we want to keep that in mind as well. We can also see more people if they're using the washing station rather than going into a bathroom, because we don't have cameras in bathrooms. So we can keep a little bit better visual on that. So classroom thoughts, I spoke to this a little bit about our building capacity, our staffing and classroom size. Some of you may have heard that we had worked so hard in legislature and education to finally fully fund our high school success plan, to have this increased money in our SSA, or student success account. And then when COVID-19 hit, suddenly we were told statewide that education was getting a $9 billion hit, which made us all very nervous because we thought we were flush with money, and now suddenly we were having to cut millions of dollars out of our budget. So July 15th is the next day legislation is meeting to make final determinations about our funding. But what that looks like is that we will likely, and fingers crossed, I don't believe we will have any reductions in staff. We might be able to hire some additional mental health supports because of the SIA money is kind of tagged with some of that because of the work we did earlier in the spring. But that means we can't suddenly hire twice as many teachers in an attempt to get more students into the building. So this does require cohorting into an A-B group for physical distance at school 2 days per week. What that will likely look like is that cohort A would attend Monday, Wednesday, cohort B would attend Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, we recognize that our staff need time to learn these new systems, to plan thoughtfully, to provide really quality instruction. And so that Friday would be professional development days for our staff to ensure that they are getting what they need to do the best job for our kids. The other days of the week that students are not physically attending, they would be engaged in the other aspects of that comprehensive distance learning class. So it would still be the same class, just a little bit different format, kind of homework assigned in different ways, engaging in the online class in different ways. Our custodial staff will be cleaning and sanitizing daily. Hand sanitizer, I mentioned, would be all over the school. And then we also have to maintain a log of students in the classrooms, because if an administrator or a classroom assistant comes into that room, then that is considered that there's been contact made. So whenever I do my rounds, I'm going to have to write down that I was in individual rooms. So we're having to be very thoughtful about what that procedure looks like. We're also looking at using cameras or possibly streaming in classrooms for synchronous learning, so same time learning, to provide access to students to see that in-class direct instruction if they are absent, but maybe they could view class live. So we're looking at that as an option. We were lucky to receive $38,000 from Inroads Credit Union for our Team Up program. So thank you to the community for that. That's $12,000 more than last year. And so we have used some of that money to install cameras at our fields, our gyms, our auditoriums, so that we can live stream events that we may not be allowed to have spectators attend based on whatever our guidance is. The other piece to that is that we take in a lot of our revenue for athletics and activities through our ticket sales and gate receipts. And when we don't have spectators, we're not taking in that revenue, which keeps our program sustainable. So that pays for our officials, that pays for our uniforms, that, you know, it's a pretty big piece to that. So having this kind of a program could allow for us to sell advertising, could also allow for us to sell subscriptions. So you purchase a subscription to watch all of the fall sports. So we could keep some of that revenue coming in. The great thing about it too for our community is we could have restaurants or other businesses that purchase a subscription, and they could be live streaming our activities and events throughout our community. So that's kind of exciting. The other piece is that we want to make sure all of our students have one-to-one devices for them to carry throughout the day, because we don't want students touching a computer in this computer lab and maybe it doesn't get wiped down and then another student comes and touches it. So we're trying to minimize that contact. I mentioned about moving to a consistent learning management system. College courses use systems like this all the time. Canvas is one that we are looking at, and we're hoping that that will streamline our instructional delivery and communication. It's also similar to what our dual credit programs use, so that would blend really nicely to our students that are in our dual credit programs. We're also working collaboratively with dual credit and AP to make sure that all of our students are receiving the content needed to fulfill those requirements and make sure that they are highly prepared for testing. And then we're also looking at a schedule that moves to 8 courses per year rather than just 7, which is what we had offered in the past, to allow additional opportunities for students to earn credit. Maybe they want to explore an additional elective class that they did not have access to in the past. Our previous service models for students of English as a second language or special education is that they would usually have to take an additional class that would then limit their opportunity to take another class that they found really interesting. So by offering 8 periods instead of 7, split into a block, they can take an additional class. The other benefit to that too is that because we're offering additional opportunities, if we have some motivated students that would prefer to graduate early and then not have to be physically present in the building because they're higher at risk, or they just don't want to take that chance, or they want to move on to whatever is next, that gives them that additional opportunity to do so. Some thoughts about meals. As screening happens at the beginning of school, we know it's going to take time, and we don't want students to feel rushed in getting their food. So we've thought about grab and go breakfast at screening stations. We are also looking at a bell schedule that has multiple staggered lunches because we also have to be accommodating physical distancing requirements in the cafeteria and the commons. Again, we have to be cohorting and we have to be tracking that. So ways to do that and make sure that kids are all being served in the cafeteria and the commons would be potentially offering food at kiosks so they can be spread out and observe that physical distancing. What that also means is that we are going to have to close down our off-campus lunch because that would prevent untraceable cohort mixing. And if they go out into the community, then there are different restrictions as far as wearing masks. So kids may not have to be wearing masks at school, but as soon as they leave and they go someplace else, then they would, and we wouldn't want to have issues in that way. But the other piece to that too is that anyone who comes back into the building would have to be screened again because we would have no way of tracing who had been in the building already if they open it up. And that would end up negatively impacting class time. So we want to make sure that our students are engaged in class time all the time that we possibly can get them and not have less time just because of a half an hour off-campus lunch. So we recognize that's going to be a shift. But we are open to ideas of how to make that as least impactful as possible. Staff serving meals will have face coverings on at all time. In fact, we are going to have our staff wearing face coverings at all time. My mom actually sewed little masks with lions all over them for our entire staff so that everybody can have a lion face mask. So just know that that is a practice and we want to be modeling that behavior for our students as well. And then we are expecting students to be washing their hands, practicing good hygiene before lunch, before moving into the next class period. Again, we've learned that that hygiene and washing hands is the best way at reducing risk. So school departure, again, classroom teachers have to keep a log so that we know who's there and who's not, when they're there. We'll have to figure out the pickup to make sure there's physical distancing, both for the buses and for pickup. Buses, we're still working out with transportation around reverse route or so that we don't have too many kids walking past each other as they're getting on and off the bus. So there may be assigned seats in that way. And then custodial class staff will be cleaning and disinfecting nightly, along with all bathrooms and common areas, because we want to keep our school building sparkling clean before we tear it all down and rebuild it just in a couple years. So it'll be great. So I wanted to open this up for feedback that you have. Maybe what are your hopes for starting the school year? How can we improve on these ideas? If you have any specific ideas around how we can best support your student. I mentioned Rose is taking notes, but you can also type questions into the chat and then, or comments or suggestions. That will all be transcripted so we can grab that. Or you're also welcome to mute yourself. So I can look through some of the group chat. One question, will students be given homework for the 3 days they aren't there, or will they be actually given instruction? So the comprehensive distance learning is going to be a robust virtual online program that is coordinated with what the students are doing in person. So because we're opting for an A, B, and then a day off, that means they're going to see their teacher in person every other day so that they have really clear expectations around what they should be doing the next day. So that will all be a coordinated class. It may have videos that students are watching. It may be additional activities that they're engaged in online, or additional project or building off of what they did. So we're still in the development of that, but we do have an entire teaching and learning team. We have 14 of our teachers that are really committed to making this the best program moving forward, and they're going to be working together to develop that. There was also a question, why not have Group A attend Monday, Tuesday, B Thursday, Friday, with Wednesday a cleaning day? We had brought that up as a possibility, and our superintendent thought about that for a moment, and then we looked at that from a perspective of a parent. So if I have a student who's attending school Monday, Tuesday, then they're not physically in the building for another 5 days, and vice versa. So as a parent, how would I feel about my student not going to school for 5 days in a row every single week? The other piece around that too is that if a student is ill or comes down with something, they're more likely to miss 2 days in a row than they are to miss like every other day. So if we have a kid who is absent on a Monday and they're still getting better on a Tuesday, then they've essentially missed out on a whole week of in-person instruction. So if we alternate it, then we can help reduce that likelihood. So students would at least be able to attend 1 day per week. So that was part of the rationale of that. The third piece is that we need to be providing meals to our students. And if a student is, let's say in group A, comes Monday, Tuesday, that means that on Tuesday, they would have to carry home with them 4 more days or 3 more days of meals to cover them for the next few days that they would not be attending. So we feel like having them carry 3 lunches and 3 breakfasts home with them on the last day may be difficult to, and I don't know about you, but I don't like eating meals 3 days after they've been made for me. So so that's a third piece to that too. But that is something we considered. Another question, with a class size so small, will students be allowed to have classes like choir or band that require a larger group? Yeah, when I talk about master scheduling, and I know it's a really complex problem, or really, I guess, a challenge, is that we generalize across the board, but then we set certain classes to have larger class sizes. So there's some courses like computer science, we can only have 15 students at a time, even during the regular school year, because of some limitations around our remote teachers that volunteer. But then we know with band and choir, they can have upwards of 100 students, or PE, 40 students, but we kind of calculate that all in there. So I'm speaking in generalities and averages, but we will be adjusting individual class sizes to accommodate for that, as long as the space that we have available provides that 35 square foot distance. So I've been talking with our band and choir director about alternate spaces. We need to make sure there's really good ventilation. If students need to be wearing face shields, if we need to be using multiple spaces and what supervision would look like. So we're trying to brainstorm ways right now of how we can keep our kids engaged in those programs. And I don't know how many of you know this, but I was a high school choir director myself. And so it's something that's very dear to my heart, that I want to make sure that kids continue to be engaged in those programs. And I keep reminding our music teachers, music is a consistent thing that has happened throughout time. And this may just be a weird glitch in history, but music will continue. It just might look a little bit different for a little bit longer. So there was another question. I also talked about 4 class blocks. So are these types of classes even possible with these classes needing to be full year due to competition season? So the other piece to that too is that many of our larger circuits have canceled competitions for the year or for the season due to just kind of the uncertainty. So music competitions fall under OSAA academics policy. So we take our guidance from them. Right now, they are completely absorbed with athletics and determining what they're going to do. Even just 2 days ago is when they finally decided they were not going to flip-flop our spring and fall sports. So it was a consideration that we were going to start the year with softball and tennis and baseball and then flip it around. So they're still making decisions just, like as we speak. So a lot of this is going to be kind of as we go. But we are going to be talking about that, the block schedule and what that could look like. One of the pieces to that block schedule is offering a 0 period class. So that can be an option. We also have a built-in intervention and enrichment period that meets every single day. So that could be another 45-minute, it wouldn't be a full block, but it could be at least 45 minutes in there. I know some teachers had offered a potential optional session after school where we couldn't necessarily require students because we may not have transportation. But if we wanted to have students that wanted to engage in those kind of after school activities, we could do that as well. So we're brainstorming as many different ways that we can continue those programs successfully. Question, why a blended plan when our daily case numbers are increasing almost daily and there doesn't seem to be any evidence that cases will stop increasing? It looks like we're on an upward trajectory. Is this plan subject to change? So it is. The best way that I can think to describe this is that our plans have to be elastic and ready to pivot in whatever direction based on the guidance we receive. So we want to try to lower the risk as much as possible, but we also want to balance that with making sure that kids are engaged in the classes that they need to be in for graduation, for post-secondary work, to be really prepared, to be able to socialize with their peers, to be able to have that face-to-face contact. So we recognize that there's conflicting interest there, but we need to minimize that risk as much as possible. As there's an upward trajectory of numbers, like we've mostly, probably most of us have seen an increase in Columbia County with a couple of different recent outbreaks or cases, is that we will then take our guidance from the Oregon Health Authority. So they are notified whenever someone gets a positive test or there's a presumptive case, then the physician who has that result then reports that to the Oregon Health Authority, which is why we see those reports and those numbers. So based on that county, the authority then does contact tracing or would contact us and then ask us for our logs and say, who has that person been in contact with? If it turns out that, and then we take our guidance from them. We basically turn it over to them and say, what do you want us to do? Because we are not epidemiologists. That is their primary job. So I'm hoping that we would be able to, shift very quickly and be able to protect the rest of the cohort or whoever the people are that person had been in contact with, and then that person can get healthy and until they return. But again, it may be that Oregon Health Authority comes back and says, nope, this spread too quickly and the entire school needs to shift to comprehensive distance learning for the next 14 days. And then after 14 days, maybe we come back to the blended learning. So that's also part of the reason why we're thinking about having a 4x4 block schedule where students are only enrolled in 4 classes each semester. So you're still taking 8 classes, but you're taking a full year curriculum in 1 semester, so that instead it's not impacting all 8 of your classes. You are streamlined just with 4 teachers. So it's a little bit easier to manage all of that work and to be able to provide those interventions. But then we also would provide that additional class that we didn't offer this year, that 8th period, in case we need additional buffer to make any adjustments later on. And then participation in courses like band and choir be considered in cohort grouping. Those classes are almost considered cohorts in themselves because they have additional events and activities outside. So those CTE would be the same thing. So those are kind of cohorts that we would be tracing as well. And to avoid confusion when school starts, how do we make sure that our student gets the full virtual online program? So that program is still in process of being adopted by our district. And so more information will come out before August 15th about how to register for the full online virtual option, because we also want to make sure we have correct data of who we're communicating with, what the systems are, how you get all set up. So more information will come out later this fall, but we want to make sure that everyone has that clear information. Blended, let's see, I think I answered that question about the blended structure, about choir and band. And we also recognize that there are some of our students that live with high-risk family members. And so that's going to be a piece that I'm going to be working with our specialists, like choir and band and CTE and some of those programs that are very difficult to do in comprehensive distance learning. and try to bring all of our brains together so that there's some continuity there. Crystal had asked, will students still move from class to class during the day? There's students have at the high school level, there's no way that we could figure out a way for students to stay in one location and have teachers move. That's school-wide. We wouldn't have the supervision to do that. There are some classrooms that have specialized equipment that we have to make sure that students have access to. So students will still move from class to class during the day. That's also part of the reason why we're thinking about the 4 periods, is that would also reduce the number of students who are in the hallway, or at least the number of times through the day that students are not in the hallway. And then by having the staggered lunches, that also means during those passing periods in the middle of the day, there's a significant fewer number of students in the halls. So we're more likely to be physical distancing during passing periods. So it makes it safer when we have less transitions, but we recognize kids at the high school still have to transition. We will not have lockers, however. Historically, like, lockers were almost like a rite of passage when I was in high school. Interestingly enough, the majority of our high school students do not use their lockers anyways, and the lockers that we do assign them, they don't use. They use their friends' lockers that we don't keep track of because they don't tell us that they're switching lockers. So that creates issues for us. If we have kids that are using the wrong lockers, then we have no way of doing that kind of contact tracing. So again, if they're only going to 4 classes per day, there's less need for them to have to go and move books or that kind of thing. So we're looking at all of the logistical pieces there to minimize that risk. 0 period, we will still offer a 0 period. Kathleen had asked, will letter grades be given? The decision to move to the pass incomplete was a direction by the Department of Education that was statewide. The most recent information that has been shared is that we are back to a comprehensive education program. We are offering letter grades as we did in the past. We're no longer in that pass incomplete as kind of a reaction. So the only thing that I've seen about graduation requirements that have changed for this year's rising seniors is that they also will not have to complete their essential skills or the career-related learning experiences or the My Plan essay and the resume piece. So those were additional graduation requirements that all students had to do, but they have suspended those for this year's rising seniors. Part of that is that a lot of those pieces are done throughout the year during their junior year, and they may not have been able to complete those already. So as far as I know right now, state testing is still expected to take place. I know myself and a lot of other high school principals have pushed back on that and saying if we had students that were missing a significant amount of instruction last year, how would they be prepared to take our state assessments, especially with all of the craziness that this fall may be and how uncertain that is. So I think that may still be a conversation that we have with the Department of Education. A question I heard, students will be allowed to attend without masks. This puts other students and staff at risk. I agree, the CDC recommends wearing masks, businesses require masks. This is a decision by the Department of Education in that we cannot prevent a student from accessing their education if they choose to not wear a mask. So we are questioning ODE. Does that mean that if a student is non-compliant with our requests to wear masks, because all of our staff are modeling that throughout the day, and that's putting other people at risk, can we say that you have to move to a comprehensive learning model? That question is still being worked out, and I'm sure that that information will be, more information will be shared in further iterations of the guidance. So as of right now, we cannot provide or we cannot prevent a student from accessing their education. Whether that's in the hybrid or the comprehensive model is yet to be seen. Question, if the governor doesn't order schools closed, but Columbia County cases are skyrocketing, will the district close schools based on our county numbers or follow state guidelines? So we actually would follow our local public health authority. So our Columbia County Public Health Authority would make that determination of what our next steps are. So they would consult with the governor's office, but they would actually make the decision based on what's happening in our county, which may be very different than what's happening in other counties, or maybe in other cities within our county. So maybe St. Helens skyrockets and we need to be shut down, but Vernonia is doing just fine. So they would keep them open, or Scappoose is doing just fine and they would keep them open. So it will depend on the guidance from our local public health authority. I answered the question about lockers, that we will not have locker access. Vocational classes, so the CTE, Michelle, did I miss something specific about vocational classes? Can you unmute so I can get clarification?
Yeah, I've been listening and I kept hearing about the band and choir, but I didn't hear about like metals, wood shop, auto. Did I miss that, or did you see that?
No, so we, I didn't address that because I was answering a question specific about band and choir, yeah. But in CTE, definitely, we need to be working with our teachers because so many of those programs are hands-on. You know, in auto, for example, you know, part of a comprehensive distance learning model, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I would necessarily want my high schooler coming home and working on my car if they were in beginning auto shop and didn't have a whole lot of guidance. So we are definitely going to be working with our CTE teachers, and also all of our CTE teachers have industry advisory committees. That's part of being a program of study. So that means that those CTE teachers also have a group of industry professionals that they can be bouncing ideas off of and work collaboratively so that we can develop a program that's going to have that hands-on component when they're in person, but then when they're doing the comprehensive piece, how we can craft those activities or those lessons to then support the in-person work. Did that answer your question?
Well, is the plan to still have them in the fall?
Yes.
It's a good question.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Question, PSAT, SAT testing in October. That's a really good question. We are required to purchase all of our tests through the College Board over the summer. Actually, August 7th is our deadline for ordering. And so we are hoping that it would go according to plan. What that means is we may work together with our faith-based partners or with our Parks and Rec and maybe offer additional spaces to be able to take the proctored exams. So we still have to be following our guidelines in the Ready School Safe Learners. But again, school districts across the United States, and particularly in Oregon with this guidance, we're all going to have the same questions. So I have been on a statewide principals call almost weekly, if not twice per week, and we continue to be talking through all of these different scenarios and getting ideas from each other about how to address these issues. Because everybody's in a little bit different situation, but we're all dealing with the same guidance. And Curtis had said PCC has to do the same thing for vocational classes for CTE. Yeah. And a lot of those classes too are dual credit aligned with our PCC programs, we also have a couple other dual credit partnerships. So we're also going to be coordinating with those dual credit programs, PCC, so that they are all still aligned. And we still will offer AP classes, yes. We'll also be looking at that schedule and determining what's the best way to provide the content that those students need and be prepared to take the AP tests in the spring. So again, working closely with College Board, and that's also a benefit to having 8 periods where students could have an extra period during the second semester. In that maybe we offer an AP review or a test taking class or something that can be supporting our students. Again, we only had our students forecast for 7 classes because that's what we were planning to offer. So if we're offering 8 classes next year, we have some flexibility in meeting the needs of our students and families. I think I hit all of the questions that were in the chat. Does anybody have a question or some feedback or suggestions that they would like to unmute and share? Oh, Danny, thank you so much. We are doing the best we can. Thank you, Curtis. Thanks, Jeremy. Ryan had a question about how to split into cohorts. I think a lot of that's going to be driven by transportation, because we want to be articulating with our families that have kids in multiple schools. So we will likely be looking at the bus routes to determine how best to cohort and determine who is in attendance which days per week. Karen asked, will there be additional listening sessions to keep us updated? I got that same question from our staff today too. I think there's a lot of people that are anxious and they want to know what the progress is that's happening. And maybe they come up with a really great idea, but it was after a listening session. Please, I encourage you, if you have those ideas, please email me, katyw@sthelens.k12.or.us. And then we can be addressing those as we work. I will host additional listening sessions as we have more progress. Likely after we get the next guidance, July 21st, and we get some of that review, then we will be able to host another listening session. We also have our site council that is going to continue to meet through the summer, so that they are keeping updated on what's going on and be providing guidance. We still have our PTO that's there to support our families. So if you have questions about that, I don't know if Angie is on the line or not, but Angie Ohlert is on both site council and our PTO. So you can reach out to her or site council as well if you would like to engage in that way as well. I will also put out another Zoom invite too for the listening sessions.
Dr. Wagner, could you put your email in the chat so we can copy it and save it?
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. Can households split learning styles? So if one wants hybrid and one wants online only, that's perfectly fine. Once we get the virtual online school up and running and we know who is registered for that, then we can certainly accommodate those different needs. And we recognize that students have different learning styles or different medical needs, or maybe we have some students that are feeling a lot of anxiety about coming to school and they would just much rather engage in that virtual program. It doesn't have to be by household. Coffee cart, that's a really good question. Any kind of food service definitely throws a challenge at us. So I am going to be working with our transition program and also our student services director, Lori, to try to figure out what we can do with the coffee cart, what kind of restrictions we may have. But we recognize how important it is for our students that are engaged in coffee cart to have that customer service experience and that work experience. And we also want to make sure we're keeping all of our students safe. We'd also have to look at how we would manage the use of the coffee cart, because we can't have students just leaving class to go purchase something and then meander around, right? We have to be monitoring that. So it's definitely going to take lots of brain power to work that out. For those choosing online learning to continue to involve in band and choir, that is something that Noelle Freshner is also on our reopening team. So she's providing a lot of input into that. And we definitely want to make sure that our students are engaged in our school activities and staying connected to our district. That's part of the reason why we're developing the online virtual school, because we know how important community is. So we will make sure that kids still have those opportunities to engage in those courses.
Will the district and the high school be able to purchase additional Chromebooks if, you know, students are going to need them at home some days? And are they still going to be able, I mean, I know that there was like a shortage and they weren't able to be ordered.
Yeah, so I think the supply chain has certainly improved after the spring kind of exploded and everyone was trying to purchase all of the Chromebooks they possibly could get their hands on. I know that our IT department is taking that on as a project to make sure that everything is inventoried, everything that may have come back to us is repaired, and we have enough devices school-wide to be able to provide those for students. We also are going to have to talk about policies if we want to encourage students to bring their own device. Some schools or districts, even before this happened, had a BYOD or bring your own device policy. Others did a complete one-to-one. We purchased an iPad for you to use for all 4 years that you're in school. There's been a lot of different models in getting technology into students' hands. So we'll just have to figure out what we have available to us and how we can supplement that, and then how we can support that at-home learning as well. So I think that that's a really integral part of being able to do the comprehensive distance learning. I do know that we're also looking into a rural broadband grant to increase access to broadband internet for all of our families. So that I think maybe the deadline was today that our district was completing that application. So we want to increase the connectivity for all of our families so they can engage in the full education experience. All right, so I'm going to use my Zoom waiting time. Are there any other questions or concerns, feedback, ideas? Okay, so as I mentioned and I included in the chat, feel free to send me an email if anything comes up, if you would like to share some of your feedback or suggestions. I am trying to respond as quickly as possible. Technically, I'm not on contract between July 1st and the 15th, but I am really committed to making sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to keep checking on emails and staying on top of that. This meeting has been recorded, and so I will be putting this online and sending our families a link to it as well in case you missed any of this. All right. Great. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. Thanks, Owen. All right. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy. I hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you again soon.